Decentralize all the things. Decentralize all the things.
Hey there! Welcome to the Web3 Summit Decentralize Now podcast series, hosted by the Decentralize All The Things podcast network. This series features discussions about decentralization from the 2018 Web3 Summit held in Berlin, Germany. This is episode 9. In this episode, we take a deep dive into decentralized governance, where several great minds explore the depths of this topic together. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
So this discussion is going to be about, it's an open discussion on governance. There's a lot of stuff going on in Ethereum. Lane's going to come here in a second and maybe also bring something to this discussion. So I'm curious, what are you guys' thoughts on governance in general, and how do we improve it?
Yeah, so governance, how about it? You guys as excited about this topic as I am? So my understanding of the format is that we're in a fishbowl, we being the 5 of us. Is it 5 seats? Yeah, you want to explain again?
Yeah. So the way this fishbowl works is really fun. So Kiki just sat down, so now someone else has to get up. Oh, no. Okay. So there's always one open seat, and so it's like a musical chair game, right? And anyone who's sitting out here, if you have a question, you just come and sit down right there. And then, you know, it's okay if there's 5 people there for a minute or whatever. Somebody will get antsy and leave. You don't have to worry about it, right? But yeah, then the conversation just happens, and you know, you guys should be talking to each other and forget about the crowd. So, but this is just an open discussion, and Lane, you can take it away and give us something to discuss about.
Thank you, Griff. Hi, I'm Lane, and I am not here to talk. I'm here to steward a conversation about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to many of you as well. And that topic is governance, and more specifically, decentralized governance. I'll just give you guys 30 seconds of kind of why this matters to me, and then we'll just kind of kick off with questions and conversation, open dialogue. I'm relatively new to the Ethereum and blockchain and decentralization world in general. I've been doing this for about a year now, and I noticed about a year ago that topics like scaling get a lot of attention, and a year ago, governance wasn't getting a lot of attention. I think that's changed recently. But I do think that one of the biggest crises or challenges or opportunities, depending how you frame it, right, that's facing us as a community today is governance. And more specifically, you know, I think we have to appreciate that blockchain in general, Bitcoin specifically, and I think to a large extent Ethereum as well, was created in direct response to perceived failures of governance in meat space. There's a reason that Bitcoin emerged in 2008, 2009. There's a reason that the Genesis block of Bitcoin refers to bank collapse. And anyway, yeah, so this is my motivation for being here. I think that for me, Ethereum is a tool to make the world a better place and replace some of the aging governance structures that we have in the real world. So that's my motivation for being here. I would love, do you guys mind if you guys each share your motivation, why governance matters to you? Oh, one quick thing. In the spirit of true decentralization, I actually have to pop out for something in about 20 minutes. So like, that doesn't matter because this is decentralized, right? So when that happens, don't freak out. I'll come right back, but someone else takes my spot. Yeah.
I don't agree with that. You should stay. Awesome. What I think about governance, what I don't get is why we create all this technology to make sure we don't make the same mistakes, but then try to use this technology to do the same kind of stuff all over again. Like talk about where should we all go, but there is no all, right? There is no, the whole point is like you're responsible for your value individually. And so in my belief, like when you don't have like shared value, there's no need for governance. So to me, the whole governance debate is actually, I feel it's like a lot of air, a lot of talk, but in the end, it won't matter.
My interest is in knowing exactly what the problem is we're trying to solve. Because governance for governance is stupid, and it just gets a lot of people a job, and they're all happy and just doing their thing, getting paid, and they think they're doing something very useful. But we first have to be really sure, like, what are we trying to solve, and then find the best way with the least shitty things.
Yeah, for me, sometimes we say that this technology is going to change the world, and we are very happy because we are saying, "Oh, this is fantastic technology, and this is really going to change the world." But why we say that this is going to really change the world, and why this is a different technology that differentiates with other important technologies that happened in the past? Mainly is because governance. Because at the end, governance is it just rules the relationship between humans. Okay, so the humans, if we were alone, we will not have governance. But we are in a society, we live together, we create groups, we create associations, we try to do the things together. And if we understand governance as taking decisions in a community form, in a decentralized form, as a community, as a member, as a single entity, then here is the importance. And here is where the technology can add a lot of value to these human relationships. So that's why mainly my main interest, and that's why I think this is an important, if not the most important topic in the space.
Thank you for sharing that thought, Jordi, and thanks everyone for sharing your motivation as well. Just to add a tiny thought to that, that was the first thing I realized when I joined this beautiful decentralized Web3 Ethereum blockchain space, right? Is that we have this amazing technology, and that's natural because we're technologists, right? And technologists build shit because it's cool. We don't always think through the sort of social implications of it. But what is it for, right? This is like called the deep why question. Like, why are we all here? This is exactly the question you asked. We make a lot of noise about changing the world. How are we going to do that? I mean, I think governance is the answer, or one possible answer. Just a reminder, like, this is an open seat, so any of you guys, like, come anytime. We should mix things up, make this fun.
Here, when we talk about governance, for me there is like two steps in governance. There is one part that's more social, that's not technological. At the end, humans, we have been living together for many years before even computers were invented, and governance is still there. So there is one part that's deciding how we rule or together, okay? And this is a social part. This is part of the human part, and this is very much to the sociologist. What the technology adds is that right now we can set up whatever rules or whatever rules that manage these entities, or even these new kind of entities, these new kind of relationships between people around the globe. And this technology, what allows is that we can enforce, we have the tool to really ensure these rules that we are defining. The problem of a governance is that if you define the rules, but then nobody is believing you that the people is following the rules, because the people can cheat the rules, or the people don't have this really consensus, and the people don't trust the system. That's problematic. And then a governance that could be very good from the design perspective, maybe it's not doable, because you need maybe a central party that enforces that, and then you need to trust the central party and all that stuff. And in blockchain, with this technology, we can really use this technology to really enforce, to really convince the people that the rules that we define and that we all agree are really the ones that are enforcing. And this opens a lot of systems that were not practical before this technology appears. Right now starts appearing new governance models that were maybe from the theoretical perspective good, but not practical on that side. So this is probably one thing that this technology is going to add in the governance side. No, if people was what?
Yeah. So I mean, one way of looking at I completely lost my train of thought. One way of looking at blockchain governance is maybe that it makes possible things that were not possible before. Hi, Adrian. How are you? What do you think about this?
I just think that it doesn't have to be so binary in the sense that, like, I'm not trying to solve the world's problems. I'm trying to solve problems, and if people want to be a part of that world, then I think we're actually going to be solving problems, because like we don't need to destroy everything and create new governance for everyone on the blockchain, I think, for this to make sense on kind of a global scale. But communities around the world need to start, seeing that this could be useful for them to achieve some kind of empowerment in a democratized way. Like, I think a good example is like an Uber, for example. I don't think like a decentralized Uber is going to come from someone building a DApp in North America, but I think that's going to come from some local taxi union somewhere that's in a place that needs to somehow together cooperate to beat Uber in their local market. And I think that's how I see governance in the blockchain space kind of affecting.
Yeah, so I think there's a distinction between governance in blockchain, which you're describing, and governance of blockchain. And I'm trying to get a framework in my head, like, does one depend on the other? In a sense, it does, right? Because if the blockchain is the base layer that we're using to build systems to govern humans, or even just to organize human labor, cooperation, et cetera, like the example you're giving, then it does in some sense rely on the blockchain, the governance of the blockchain. But it's an important distinction.
Just to clarify that, so I will even distinguish, because I think there is a lot of confusion on that. One thing is, of course, is what you are governing. So you are governing maybe just an entity that has nothing to do with a blockchain. Okay, so that you are governing maybe a city or a company. Okay, and sometimes you also have to governance the decisions that you take in the same blockchain. So Ethereum, for example, they need to take decisions as a blockchain. So that's two things. Okay, and the other is this tool this tool that we use as a governance enforcement. This can be also like on chain and off chain. And this this distinguish, because sometimes people I hear on chain block governance and off chain. What really are you meaning? Are you meaning that is a governance that is in chain? So a governance for something external that you are using an on chain an on chain tool. So I think it's important to start distinguishing these concepts because they are different.
Totally. Just to comment on what you're saying. I mean, the idea of on-chain governance, in my opinion, kind of just scares me from allowing these local communities to use this technology, to use Layer 1 as this platform to do whatever it is they need to do. Like, I understand that there's not the doesn't go great, but I mean, I personally like the way everyone handles situations, like even to the Constantinople. So I mean, like, I appreciate being able to like read your write-up on it on Ethereum Magicians and stuff like that, and to be able to follow along, and not necessarily to be a part of the conversation, but to be able to follow along, and it's all fully transparent, and no one's hiding anything, but also no one's forcing you to do that. That's you, and I like that it needs people to do those things.
I think I'm glad you brought up this question of on-chain versus off-chain governance. I think this is one of the most important, like, just foundational questions in this space right now, and I do think it may be worth, for everyone's benefit, like spending a few minutes talking about what it means. But just to respond to what you just said about Constantinople, this is a great example because the risk of off-chain governance, or I should say more appropriately, not having on-chain governance, is that deals get done in the back room. And it's not transparent and it turns into a cabal. To me, there are other risks, but that's the main risk when you don't have formalized systems. And like, not everyone's comfortable with opening the windows and letting some light in. Like, I will be very frank about this. I'm a very open person. I'm very much for transparency. I think that the Ethereum community in general, the project, the protocol, the core devs, all of it would benefit from way more transparency, because to me, that's how you get all the members of the ecosystem, all the stakeholders, to feel enfranchised. Even if, as you just said, exactly as you just said, even if they're not like necessarily actively part of the decision process, at least they can watch that process unfolding, okay? But that's not, frankly, how Ethereum has worked in the past, and it's gotten a lot of pushback, both the foundation as well as the protocol governance. So I'm trying in some tiny capacity to like bring some fresh air and some light to the process, but there's pushback. Not everyone's comfortable with that.
So earlier today, we were talking a little bit about signaling, right? And signaling almost by definition has to be off chain. And how would you reconcile that with on chain governance has to be systemized, has to be systematic almost? How do you prevent that from being eventually gamified?
Yeah. So, wow, that's good. That should be louder. That's good. I have a loud voice. So, to the second question, you can't prevent it from being gamified, which is the main criticism of on-chain governance. I think that. So Vlad has spoken very eloquently about this, and I urge you to read the things he's written because he's explained it much more eloquently than I would be able to. But that's the general sentiment, right? That whenever you set down a system of rules, whatever those rules are, that system can be captured. Okay, and he spoke this morning specifically in the context of corporate capture. So I think that's why I go back and forth, but I'm generally in his camp, in the no on-chain governance camp for that reason. And to the point about signals, I think signals are especially important to us because there's no on-chain governance, right? Because on-chain governance, signals are less important. The system just works, right? Just votes happen and decisions get made. But in the world that I operate in this world of all these governance things in Ethereum, we don't have good signals. And I think that signals are especially important because we don't have anything on-chain really. And the things we do have on-chain, like coin votes, are pretty crappy. So signals are super important. So thank you to those people who are working on signals.
This is a question I've got a lot, and I'm wondering kind of your thoughts on it. When we're trying to gather these signals, many times the first worry that I get is that somehow it's going to be more influential or unfairly influence dev decisions because of some kind of weighted metric, or almost like they don't really. If we are modifying the system somehow by measuring it, then we're unfairly pushing it towards one way or the other rather than allow it to kind of go on its own.
Yeah, so part of what I'm getting, I think I got it. I think so. There's observer's paradox, right, which is the fact that in the simple act of observing or measuring, you are necessarily first of all, you're biased in what you're recording, and second of all, you're probably the act of observing, the act of recording changes the answer, right? That's a physical property of the world. I think my response to that is that's why we need multiple signals, right? Like we and here's the other thing, right? In the absence of explicit signals, let's call them explicit signals, people in a position of governance, people making decisions, we have our own signals. We each have our own system of signals, but they're not explicit, right? So like when I'm discussing just to pick on the example you brought up, that Constantinople upgrade governance of the Ethereum protocol. The conversations I have with you guys at events like this factor in, my own understanding of the code and the limitations factor in, my reading of the community via Reddit and Twitter factor in, but those aren't necessarily better or less biased than, a system of explicit signals. We're all triangulating.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what creates fear in my heart, honestly, deep down about
what the source of fear is, because you mentioned fear.
Yeah, I really see. So going backwards even to things like the DAO. I do believe at the end of the day that the social consensus of kind of the people sitting in this room, we define what the protocol is at the end of the day. There might not be governance, but if we needed to hard fork again, it would be pretty clear that there are obvious on-chain implications to it beyond just an upgrade to kind of adding new opcodes. We could, as a community, do whatever we wanted with this open source code, and I really like it that way. I really like how it doesn't necessarily appeal to certain entities because of the nature of how kind of speculative, not necessarily the prices, but the longevity of these chains are. For example, in my local community, the price going down has been the best thing for us because we've now get to just, go to events and there isn't 200 people that are all kind of looking for the next fast coin that does fast things. And I don't know, that's my fear, is that by creating too much structure, we limit the structures people can build on top of this platform for structure. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an important point. Let's come back to that. I'm going to pass the mic to James. The keeping the base layer as simple as possible.
You can keep going. Now I'm trying to remember what it was that I was going to say. Oh, the piece of fear of then I feel like fear and also the tension of we still need to get things done to upgrade the protocol. I think it's fair to say we're not finished with progress, and so I guess Ethereum in the abstract, like there's room there. If we stopped where we were today, we wouldn't get much further. And so then I feel like there's like a tension and fear in between trying to get stuff done and also trying to not get the wrong stuff done.
So we all sort of are familiar with Bitcoin governance and how it is or is not working, depending on your perspective, which is to say that there are no hard forks, really, except when they break things and fix them. They're not adding things, really. And that this is not a normative. I'm not saying this should or shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, that maybe there's a place in the world for a super stable chain that doesn't change. Like, I'm okay with that. But I guess just going off of what you just said just now, there are people in the community who are beginning to say, especially now that like the Constantinople upgrade is delayed a little bit, that Ethereum governance is starting to look like Bitcoin governance, and maybe we're not moving fast enough. I've had interesting conversations with Casey and some other folks on my team about, hey, all this attention is focused now on Shasper and the 2.0 roadmap. Aren't there a lot of other things that we can do in the short term on the main chain to make it better? There's a whole list of technical things, EVM 1.5 stuff, parallelizing transactions, account abstraction, stateless clients, all these things, these ideas that were proposed and kind of put on the table. So yeah, just an open question to anyone here. How do you guys feel about Ethereum governance? Is it responsive? Is it moving forward, or are we like calcifying?
I mean, I think things like the Moloch DAO are moving us in the right directions of the right direction of where we should be going and the way that we allocate resources to these things. For whoever doesn't know, like it's a project by the Spank Chain team to basically build out a DAO that will kind of fill the role that we rely on a lot of centralized foundations right now. And like going back to 1.5, I mean, there's very clear ramifications to what happened by stopping the funding for that. Even like with Ethereum Magicians being like potentially related to that kind of.
Do you want to share a tiny bit of the backstory?
Yeah, for sure. So Ethereum, like the EVM 1.5 was worked on by someone by the name of Greg Colvin, and his funding, like I don't know too much of the politics or anything, but he had issues with his funding, and from that came a group, not directly from that, but through other things, that is trying to be kind of the Ethereum subgroup of the IETF, which is the Internet Engineering Task Force. So it's like trying to create more structure to the governance without creating structure, and it just being like a working group. And, that was a great thing that happened. And so, maybe it's good that Ethereum didn't have governance in place, because otherwise maybe the Ethereum Magician wouldn't have occurred. You know what I mean? So I think like building, again, like away from the main chain kind of, yeah, that's where the focus should be.
I think there's an interesting question, which is really sort of a philosophical or existential question, right? Which is like, what is Ethereum to you? What is it meant to be? What should it be? Which is sort of a very normative question. And this goes back to what you said a moment ago. I wanted to come back to that about keeping the base layer as simple as possible. This has come up a number of times, both in the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians at some of the events we did, like in Berlin here a couple months ago, as well as another forum called EIP Zero, which we did in Toronto, actually back in March, I think, around ECC, EdCon, sorry. Right, and so the point that was made, which I agree with, is that you can build, like, let's say, on-chain governance on top of a system that's agnostic about governance, but the reverse is not true. Right. Once you build the on-chain governance at layer 1, let's say, then everything on top of that is subject to it. And so again, the question is, if your vision for Bitcoin is to be, sorry, I'm totally jet lagged. If your vision for Ethereum is to be a true base layer protocol, a general purpose layer upon which anything can be built, then I think that there's a very strong argument to be made for not baking governance into the protocol. But other projects like Tezos feel otherwise. And this comes up a lot in the context of like funds recovery, right? If we obviously it's a very controversial topic, but maybe that belongs at layer 2. Maybe there's some sort of insurance DAO or contract or something that people can choose to opt into and pay for, and that would insure them against losses or something. But maybe that doesn't belong at the protocol layer.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Okay. So something that I kind of think about as like a thought exercise in terms of layer 1 versus layer 2 and where the governance resides is, and this is a hypothetical for now, but I don't think it's always going to be a hypothetical, which is what happens when something occurs on the blockchain that regulatory authorities expect immediate action to resolve. And because of the lack of governance, it's very difficult to resolve. So an example would be some incredibly sensitive state secrets being put on the blockchain, not to make a value judgment about whether that's a good or a bad thing or whatever, but the results of what could happen in the real world and sort of how that meshes with the attitudes and the sort of practical process of how governance actually does or doesn't happen. So that's something I do think about on sort of a regular basis as something that's eventually going to happen. And when it happens, if there hasn't been some development of governance, it could be pretty ugly in terms of what happens to real people in the real world.
Listening in on the last couple of core dev calls, hearing about, I think they see, I don't know. It's just really, I get torn. I'm torn on this a lot, on the having things done more quickly or doing things more safely. And in the beginning of the dev call, when they pushed the fork back, and then someone had said, hey, maybe we could put in ProgPow. My initial reaction was, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. And then like 15 seconds, 30 seconds later, it's like, wait a second, we just had Robstein already have this thing, and we're thinking about jumping into it. And I feel like there's a problem of not everyone can spend the same amount of time like committed to really understanding and really getting into the issues. And many people start on that road, that train, and get on the excited, and then they don't end up being just sitting in the issue long enough to get to the conclusion that get to another conclusion. Sort of, you just start running. That's been like an observation.
Well, to respond to your point about sensitive things in blockchains that require some sort of action, given, say, Bitcoin, where there is content on Bitcoin on the blockchain that like is questionable, nobody really has the expectation that it should be removed. And I feel like only when there's a possibility of that removal happening do people actively try to use that possibility and then have that content removed or censored somehow. So in that way, like if governance exists, then that will happen. Like governments will try to like get their government secrets taken off blockchain. But it's very much the case of like when it's out there in blockchain space, kind of. Would you disagree with that? Is it the case that like you can still be coerced to remove content?
I remember reading one post of like Vitalik saying, of course, if someone had a gun to his head, he would make some kind of change, but then the community wouldn't accept it, right? As one kind of alternative to that. That even if someone was trying to remove something, it still wouldn't be removed. But it doesn't mean that there isn't real consequences for individuals. And it's like,
for me, if we're talking about Ethereum concretely, I think here is like there are some dilemmas and some things that we need to think about. So I think that the final goal of Ethereum is to build this basic layer that's like protocol, very stable, works, and of course is scalable and has all this technological that this platform that's so that's the final goal. Okay, the problem is that we are not there yet. So right now and in the short run, I see more Ethereum as very much as a lab, or if you want so it's more important right now to reach to improve the technology to arrive there that just being there. So in this path to go there, what needs to be what needs to be incentivate, what needs to be promoted is just to go as fast as we can. And going as fast as you can, maybe this is against having this decentralization or this stability and these things. So this is a dilemma that in the short term, maybe we need more centralized structures to push faster to this final goal of a decentralized dilemma. And the other thing is that's the other problem in Ethereum right now is that, it's very easy to have a governance of something that's valueless or that has a low value. Okay. But when you have to manage something that's very valuable, you cannot be wrong in the decisions. So you need to be very prudent in the decisions you are taking. Okay. And, this is the panorama. This is what we have right now. So it's like I think that in Ethereum we are clear where we want to go. We know that we need to be a little bit centralized in order to go fast to there. And in the same way, we also have something to protect that start having a lot of value. And this also stops or breaks the speed. The decisions needs to be much more prudent. So this is not an easy balance, but so far, I think that we are not doing a bad job. Of course, with a lot of things needs to be fixed and a lot of things need to be done. But in general, I don't think that we are in the wrong way.
I think one question to ask is Ethereum governance slow? Is it stable, like people are saying? Because, for example, testnets, right? You still have some degree of decision making because you're coordinating between clients. You're coordinating at least between users of a client to do version updates so your testnet can fork. That happens at a really fast rate compared to mainnet Ethereum or whatever, right? So yeah, we're doing kind of well right now on mainnet, but if you look at the ecosystem as a whole, you have new features being tested on testnets. You have things like WASM already active on Kovan, for example.
It's a huge gap between testnet and mainnet. In the value that we are talking. So right now we are, in testnet it's very easy just to advance, but it's not enough value to protect. So I would like maybe other networks that are in the middle, that they are not the main net, but are not also the testnet, that they take a lead, just proving this new advance in the technology.
But for example, with Giveth or Swarm City, you're using your testnets to transact with value, right?
But that's the exact point of I'm going to leave. That's the exact point of Ropsten versus Kovan or something like that. It is that in between. I mean, people mine Ropsten, right? And so it is this in between, just a POA testnet, and we have those layers.
Yeah, but the problem of these testnets, a blockchain without a token with real value, it's not really a blockchain. Okay, it's not. It doesn't work. We can make it work, but with tricks. But we really need. So if Ropsten had a value in their token, maybe that could be a better testnet than a Ropsten without the value. But then it would not be a testnet. So that's
I think one indicator that Robson is doing what it's saying is people were upset when it was broken. If it was truly a valueless chain, then no one would have minded that it had gone. And there's like I feel there's a lot of tension between it would be easier if it was worthless, and I don't know how to make it. I don't know how to make it better than it is.
Well, you can use Rinkeby or Koban. It's more centralized. At the end, you need to take some balances in some way. But I don't think so. Robson is a testnet, and you cannot compare what's happening in testnet in what's happening in mainnet. It's like in testnet. If there is some people that's spending lots of money or not much money just mining that, they can do whatever they want. They just can do a 51% attack. They cannot mine transactions, reply transactions in different orders. They can do whatever they want. So it's not really. So I don't think it's. So it's useful for testing some technical things. It's very useful. Of course, I'm not going against. I think Robson makes a good job on what's doing. But I'm just seeing that probably there is a gap. It's a huge gap between mainnet and testnet.
And the like Rinkeby and Koban are also not really close enough to being mainnet to even sometimes be testing it fully because it isn't mineable and all those things. So I'm agreeing that there's like this big gap, and we need finding a way to figure that out.
Yeah. For example, for me, one question: why Constantinople has not been approved first in Koban or in Rinkeby?
Well, on Kovan at least, the block number for Constantinople was after the Ropsten fork. So it's just a matter of we waited too long.
And I tell you why. And that's and maybe we go to the core of the place. Is Rinkeby and Koban are monoclient nets, so they are, one is only Geth, the other is only parity. So for example, all the consensus problems that are in mainnet, they are not in there. So they are not really even good test nets for testing that. So yeah, but I would love just to have test nets first that are multi-client. I think that there is people that's working on that side for sure. Yeah, and that's but also having I don't know. There are some networks like some Ethereum clones that have real value that maybe would be good to take a lead in testing these new improvements in both sides.
Problem with that is we're talking about governance, and the Ethereum community doesn't really have much of a say in Ethereum Classic or Expanse or Rootstock. So we can't really say, hey, we want this upgrade, we want to see how it works, and go to the Rootstock devs or the Expanse devs and say, can you try it out first? It'll be like...
I just like to plug a project we're working on. At ETH Berlin, we attempted to port over Aura into Geth to create a multi-client POA testnet. It was a lot of work, and we did not succeed in the task. And we're right now kind of assessing the situation and moving forward with kind of the opposite way around, implementing Clique into parity. And so we're trying to work on that right now. So I think there are definitely efforts to address the problems that you're raising, and they are huge problems. The fact that we don't have a single POA testnet, but as you mentioned, that still doesn't solve our problem of what went wrong with Ropsten. But I think looking at how people responded to all of these problems, I think it's good that there was an issue. It's good that these things happen because we're learning from these things, and it's incredible to see just little things like conversations with people talking about having a plan for if next time this happens, we'll be already all on the same page in terms of what will happen if it doesn't work, right? Because it won't be shocking next time. So that excites me a lot, is seeing how we respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely agree on that. Yeah, I think that this event with Robson was very good for many things. For of course, for seeing the lack of test in some specific issues, seeing how the people react, seeing the lack of some tools for monitoring some stuff, and also there is one thing that's very important is just training people to manage that situation too. So it was like the best test that we can do in being trained in training for bad things that can happen in mainnet. So I think for me I see it as an incredible good experience that will gives a lot of value to the Ethereum in general. This experience in the last weeks.
I like how nobody's denying that test nets and development processes like that are not part of the development governance process of Ethereum.
I think it's part, because if depending what you think on Ethereum, okay, but if you think in Ethereum that in a project that's trying to improve the technology to reach the final goal of this universal network, that means that you don't need to think only in your mainnet. You need to think in what are the steps. You need to lead in what are the steps to go there. And the steps to go there is not deciding what's going in mainnet. The steps to go there is deciding also what kind of testnets you want to have, how you want to test that, who's developing, who's hiring the developers, what communication you are doing. And you have to take a lot of decisions that has nothing to do with with what EIP goes to the mainnet. That probably also, but it's a bigger picture. Okay, and the governance on that, I don't see that can be at least fully cannot go in the net. It cannot go in the on chain. All that you cannot put. Okay, let's see what developers are going to hire. No, but again, this is a short run. This is with a specific goal for a specific moment that at some point Ethereum should be like finalized and being the base for building other things on top of that.
But like that's why I think the governance is like perfect the way it is, in the sense that if you want to get involved in the conversation, like no one invited us to talk about testnets and say, hey, we'd love for you to contribute on this testnet thing. We decided that's a problem we dealt with, and so we wanted to fix it. And I think that that's a great barrier to entry for anyone who wants to be a part of the conversation. Just like write some code and get involved. And that's obviously creating a class of like people who are the gatekeepers to this stuff. But, I'm making that like emoji where it's like, I just don't know what else to say.
Well, so I guess one thing that I don't really hear a lot, but at least thinking in terms of legacy governments and sort of how they tend to work, one aspect of them is that the people in power tend to downplay the amount of power that they have, and that you almost never see examples of people in power who willingly give up their power. So that's always one consideration in terms of who does actually have the power in governance today, what their attitude is regarding how much power they actually do have, and the likelihood that they would ever give up that power.
Sorry, going back to the Robson issues, I'm on the security testing team, so I worked on fuzz testing for Byzantium last year. Last year, Byzantium had a smooth rollout, but there were actually a lot of consensus bugs that were undiscovered, which we found through fuzz testing. And I guess when, I didn't even consider at the most recent call where they said Constantinople won't be activated on the mainnet until January. I didn't consider that a delay because I always figured it would be closer to January than November. But I guess some people were upset because they heard on the call that all the tests were going to be done in a week, and so it should go live on the mainnet by the end of November, and would like reduce the issuance as soon as possible. I don't know if that was the motivation. But I mean, I had previously stated in the core devs channel that we still wanted to get the coverage-driven fuzz tester running. Probably, I mean, maybe there's like a 5% chance that there aren't any consensus bugs left, and the coverage-driven fuzzer will find more. But if anybody else wanted to volunteer to maintain the coverage-driven fuzzer, I mean, within the foundation there was like one guy who was doing it, and now he's too busy, so then it falls on other people. And everybody else is too busy. So going back to this, I don't know if core devs are the gatekeepers, but there's a slogan from one of the co-creators of EWASM, Martin Beasy. He always said, be your own core dev. I think a lot of governance is less about like pointing the finger at, saying, this person is making a bad decision, or not preventing, whatever. And it's often the case that the better option is just not available. So, just to bring it back to Robson, we should have the coverage-driven fuzzer up and running before going live on the mainnet. But there's not a lot of people capable or with the time to get that running again.
And so, like, say we want to get involved, like our company, we do Ethereum stuff. Like, how would that process look like? How would, we potentially look at getting involved? And like one of our colleagues has the most simple PR ever, but one PR to Ethereum tests. So it's like it's definitely something we're interested in. But how do we take that next step forward?
Just I want to give maybe my personal opinion as a dev, because I think what this happened is most of the devs, if not all of the devs that do things in production, they receive pressure at some point in his life, just because, of course, there is a market pressure or whatever's investor pressure, whatever pressure that comes from outside, and you are a dev. I think and I'm talking from a dev, but I think the best way to manage that is. So there is two decisions that needs to be taken. One is going to production, and this must be taken by the dev, because the dev is the one that knows the code, that has developed and has the confidence, and at the end is the one that takes the decision. And the other decision if the dev should be there or not. That maybe that's not belong to the dev. But if you are chosen, if you have if you have chosen a dev to be part of that, then you have to stick with him. So you either just take them out, that's one kind of decision, and the other decision is let's launch or not launch. So if the code, from the security perspective, if the code is not ready, and a dev says and has the power and have the obligation to say that the code is not ready, has a responsibility to say, if they're professional, they have to say when that's ready or not. And he's the one that really knows that. So this is decision must be taken from the dev. And if the dev is not performing, then this is going to be from the management or from investors or whatever, from wherever it comes. But I think this is two decisions, and I think this applies very much also in the roster and stuff. So it's like the decision is okay. There was clearly it's not. There is no confidence. There is no trust in going mainnet. So the decision is great. And the other discussion we can talk if it's these devs are okay or not. But that's other decision. That's another thing that has nothing to do if when it's going to be Robson, when it's going to be Constantinople happen or not. That's at least how. So just personal opinion on that.
Yeah, I guess back to your question about how to, encourage more developers to join and help. I mean, that's a challenge. So whatever ideas, people have.
But make a call on that. I'm sure, you are saying that, which is great, okay? But here we are 10 persons. I'm quite sure that the community most of the people in the community is not aware that the foundation is in the need of more resources in testing. That's something that I'm quite sure that this is not known. So I would say, just communicate that. Just put a post. Hey, we need more testers.
Like, even as someone who listens to the core dev calls, like I heard like that was even an issue, and it's still kind of like where is that? There is that barrier, or maybe even that feeling of, like, again, like the emoji face. That's like, maybe like we just wait to meet in person or something like that. But is that necessary? You know what I mean? Like, are there channels to kind of reach out?
So actually, there was an internal discussion about this a little bit. It was followed on because last year, before Byzantium, Hudson had made a Reddit post saying we need help with Byzantium. I think even at that time it was still called Metropolis. I don't know. We need help with testing, and making this public announcement. It was like a couple of people ended up getting into the Gitter channel and asking questions, but it didn't lead to actual concrete contributions. So this year, we've been trying to recruit a little bit with Gitcoin bounties as like leads to then find people to help out. But I don't know. Sometimes the like public calls can be counterproductive, because then you just end up wasting time, trying to hold somebody's hand who's not going to work out in the end. So I don't know. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but
I'm just an example, but I have no idea how the testing is organized inside the foundation. I have no idea what are the internal process. I have no idea how it works. I'm just a single person. Maybe the rest of the community knows perfectly how it works, but it's not only about just saying we need tests, more tests. We are explaining how the process works, what are the things that we are doing, how it's done, what are the challenges in testing, what are the new techniques in testing. The same way that we are doing, I think, an exceptional communication in, for example, how this Ethereum 2.0 is going to happen, or talking about some cool projects. Testing, it's also a cool project. It's also a cool thing. So it's explaining what are the challenges there, why it's so important, and why it's so interesting, and how we can improve, and how we can be the chain that has the best test process in there. It's a technology. It's something that's a lot of research needs to be there, but done there, and a lot of effort needs to be done there. So it's not only about making a call. It's making a call, but also explaining what we're doing exactly the same way that you are doing that we are doing in other technologies that we are investigating or we are advancing. No, the same way. No, I see. Last day was reading an incredible good article from Vitalik explaining about some kind of miracle trees of whatever. No, that's cool. But is there any test research on there? Is there any article saying, okay, what we have improved on there? That's also part of the communications. But that's just a single suggestion.
One thing that I would like to I just wanted to raise the awareness of how critical it should be testing. I mean, as Jordi was saying before, when you go for some developer, or same as when you go for some artist, if you hire some band to play in a festival, or if you hire some speaker to be in the summit, in the congress, in whatever, you go for this person with all of the implications. So I've always thought that a developer should be responsible of his own code or her own code. And that's why test-driven development should be kind of a core foundation of a critical technology, like the Ethereum virtual machine and the whole ecosystem. So maybe that's what governance of the actual foundation and the technology should kind of make a strong bet on this thing. Because otherwise, if we need to rely that developers will have some spare time to just leave what they're doing and focusing on testing, then that's going to be procrastinated forever. That's the tendency. That's the bias. All of us have many things to do every day, and we just say, okay, I'll just test this later. On the other way, if I know it's hard with very complex pieces of software like this, but if you first write your specifications and then make them pass, it feels good, and you don't have this kind of pressure. It's a mind-releasing thing. I don't know.
Sure. So everything could be test-driven development, but there'd be no way to ensure that the tests that are written achieve full coverage, because then different clients do things differently as well. Tying this back to governance, I would say, there's kind of there were some threads on Twitter that the Constantinople issue could have been prevented if every EIP written was required to also modify the yellow paper before being merged. And I don't think that really would have helped, because when client developers don't read the yellow paper anyway when they are implementing a feature. So yeah, I'm not quite sure how this relates back to governance, but I mean, there you can have like a suggested best practices and try to say, people should do this and that before merging an EIP, but is that going to ensure a smooth rollout?
You brought up a good point. Actually, I think it was in Refute, but it was the monitoring problem, which is inherent in many, many common pool resources. So incentivize monitoring would be my takeaway from that. Monitoring the test-driven development. I don't know the depths of test-driven development, but if you can incentivize overseers to go and have a look at it, you've got the monitoring that you wanted.
This was a really good discussion, guys. I have to call it, though. We have our next topic is transparency versus privacy. And it should be really, really good. So I'm just going to rearrange these chairs a little bit, and then we're going to make this happen.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe and give us a rating or comment if you enjoyed this content. This episode was brought to you by Santa and the unicorns at giveth.io. Remember, this podcast is made possible by the donations we receive from listeners like you. If you'd like to help support the podcast, you can do so by donating Ether at datpodcast.com. That's DATT podcast.com. Please check the show notes for more information. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep decentralizing all the things.